Representative Jasmine Crockett doesn't just call out the corruption inside the Trump administration, she exposes the deeper pattern behind it. What you're about to hear isn't politics as usual. It's a blueprint of how power gets abused, how institutions get hollowed out, and how dangerous it becomes when the rule of law is treated like a suggestion rather than a foundation.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for calling this hearing. Since January, Donald Trump has used the full power of the federal government to attack Americans in cities across the country. In Donald Trump's America, you are at increased risk of experiencing militaristic operations in your home, increased risk of being subject to detainment by mass thugs and wannabe vigilantes, increased risk of suffering injuries due to reckless and illegal acts by rogue federal agents, increased risk of being deported to foreign nations even if you are an American citizen, and you're at an increased risk of being targeted by federal government for criticizing the president and his friends. Congressional Republicans have completely abandoned their Article I powers and have exchanged their responsibility to their constituents with fealty to the president. They have allowed the president to morph federal agencies into instruments of autocracy. And as a result, the president has been able to ignore federal law, disregard court orders, and implement the largest pay-for-play scheme in American history. The White House, well, what's left of it anyway, is literally up for sale. The federal courts have characterized this presidency as, quote, lawless. In fact, when ruling against illegal acts committed by the administration, a Republican-appointed federal judge stated, quote, the court cannot imagine how the public interest might be served by permitting federal officials to flaunt the very laws they have sworn to enforce. In a separate case where the administration was sued for unlawful acts, the judge, also a Republican appointee, stated, quote, allowing constitutional rights to be dependent upon the grace of the executive branch would be a dereliction of duty by this third and independent branch of government and would be against the public interest. But in another case, the court summed it up perfectly by declaring, quote, as is becoming far too common, we are confronted again with the efforts of the executive branch to set aside the rule of law in pursuit of its own goals. Judiciary Committee Republicans have been completely complicit in this corruption. But since they're so interested in restoring law and order, I have a couple of suggestions on where they can start. Number one, this is the President of the United States standing beside his best friend, Jeffrey Epstein. As we all know, Mr. Epstein is one of the most notorious sexual predators in American history. For 8 weeks, the Republicans on this committee have chosen to protect these two men instead of providing justice to Mr. Epstein's victims. Now the administration is panicking. First, they campaigned on releasing the Epstein files. Then AG Bondi and Associates did a photo op with the files. And she said, and I quote, the Epstein list is on my desk. Then somehow the Epstein list didn't exist. Then the Epstein files became a Democratic hoax. Now the president is supposedly supportive of releasing the files, even though he's currently ignoring a congressional subpoena to do so. Now the president is simply crashing out. And it's because he can't seem to explain his special decades-long relationship with one of the most prominent sexual predators in American history. It's already public that he's in the Epstein files, but his administration is hiding the context of his involvement, if any, with Mr. Epstein's horrific crimes. Now, this is Miss Ghislaine Maxwell. Miss Maxwell, who obviously helped Jeffrey Epstein traffic more than 1,000 women and girls. Well, Donald Trump is now giving her special treatment while she's serving out her prison sentence. He won't even rule out giving her a pardon or commuting her sentence. I don't need to explain why pardoning sex traffickers wouldn't be restoring law and order. Now, this is Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem. Not only has Secretary Noem been busy filming propaganda ads, she's also been busy cashing in on millions of taxpayer dollars. In fact, Secretary Noem has funneled millions of dollars to a company called the Strategy Group. The Strategy Group helped Secretary Noem win her campaign to become the governor of South Dakota. Corey Lewandowski, her top policy advisor, has worked with the firm. And the company CEO is married to Secretary Noem's chief spokesperson, Mrs. Tricia McLaughlin. This is what corruption looks like. They're stealing money from the American people's pockets and depositing it into their bank accounts. Now we move on to yet somebody else. This is the so-called border czar, Tom Homan. Mr. Homan is on tape accepting $50,000 in cash bribes stuffed in a brown paper bag from an undercover FBI agent. Apparently, Mr. Homan accepted these bribes in exchange for awarding federal contracts to his friends. Trump's Department of Justice killed the investigation into Mr. Homan's crimes, and congressional Republicans didn't say a mumbling word. Lastly, this is insurrectionist and Nazi sympathizer Ed Martin. It appears that Mr. Martin is functioning as the Associate Deputy Attorney General, Pardon Attorney, Director of the Fake Weaponization Working Group, and Special Attorney for Mortgage Fraud. All that means is that Mr. Martin is Trump's lapdog, whom the president sends to initiate lawsuits against the president's perceived political opponents. This is what we call organized crime. They're breaking the law, often by stealing taxpayer dollars, covering up their crimes by ending and obstructing investigations, then prosecuting people who call out their unlawful behavior. And while the Republicans are encouraging this corruption, they're abandoning actual victims of violent crime and ignoring the Republican-led state's 21st century murder crisis. In September's appropriation markup, congressional Republicans proposed reducing the FBI staff by thousands of positions and underfunding the agency by more than $1 billion. They've proposed slashing resources from the ATF. They've proposed cutting grants for juvenile justice programs and hate crimes and eliminating the community violence intervention and prevention grants. They're literally defunding the police. So no matter what they say at today's hearing, congressional Republicans have proven that they are not investing in keeping American communities safe from violent crime. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
When Jasmine Crockett speaks here, she isn't just rattling off accusations. She's mapping out a pattern of authoritarian behavior that Americans need to understand. She starts with the simple truth. Since returning to office, Trump has used federal power not as a tool of governance, but as a weapon against his own people. And when she describes Americans being at increased risk of militaristic operations in their homes or being detained by vigilantes and rogue agents, she's pointing to something Democrats have been warning about for years. Once you normalize political violence and militarized policing, you can justify almost anything under the banner of law and order. What Crockett lays out is the dangerous shift from a government that serves the public to a government that targets anyone the president sees as an enemy, be it critics, journalists, immigrants, or political opponents. When the executive branch claims unchecked authority, citizens lose their rights first, and accountability disappears next. And the most concerning part she highlights is the absolute silence from congressional Republicans, who were once defenders of separation of powers, but now appear willing to let the president do anything as long as it benefits their political agenda. Then she quotes Republican-appointed judges, Republican judges, who themselves had to call Trump's actions lawless. That alone tells you this isn't a partisan exaggeration. These are conservative judges warning that the administration is bypassing the Constitution to pursue its own goals. That's not politics. That's a flashing red emergency light. But then Crockett shifts to what has truly rattled the administration, the Epstein files. Republicans campaigned on releasing them, made a spectacle out of claiming they had them, then suddenly insisted they didn't exist, then called them a Democratic hoax, and now pretend to support releasing them while ignoring subpoenas to do exactly that. Crockett is pointing out the obvious. The story keeps changing because Trump cannot explain his long, very public association with Jeffrey Epstein. And while he's content to accuse everyone else of wrongdoing, he refuses transparency when it comes to his own involvement. She makes it clear some of the files are already public, and Trump is in them. But the question is the context. What kind of interactions were there? What did he know? And how far did the relationship go? That's what the administration is hiding. Then Crockett brings up Ghislaine Maxwell. Instead of taking a hard stance against someone convicted of trafficking children, Trump offers her special treatment and refuses to rule out a pardon. Just imagine the message that sends. The same administration claiming to champion law and order won't rule out pardoning a sex trafficker who helped exploit over 1,000 girls. That's not restoring order. That's protecting criminals when they're politically convenient. Next, she reveals the corruption around Secretary Kristi Noem, funneling millions of taxpayer dollars into a political network tied directly to her campaign allies and personal advisors. Crockett calls it what it is: taxpayer money being siphoned into private pockets under the guise of government work. This isn't small-time misconduct. This is a coordinated system where public money becomes a slush fund for political friends. And once again, Republicans say nothing. Then there's Tom Homan, Trump's so-called border czar, caught on tape accepting $50,000 in cash stuffed in a paper bag in exchange for government contracts. But instead of prosecuting him, Trump's DOJs shut the investigation down. If an ordinary American accepted a bribe at their job, they'd be arrested instantly. But under this administration, the law only applies downward, not upward. Crockett then exposes another figure, Ed Martin, a far-right activist with a history of extremist sympathies, now functioning in multiple senior legal roles inside the administration. His job? To weaponize the legal system against Trump's political enemies. This is not how a democracy functions. It's how autocracies consolidate power. When you give extremist loyalists authority to prosecute opponents while protecting allies, you're not draining the swamp. You're building a criminal enterprise inside the government. Crockett calls it organized crime, and she isn't exaggerating. The pattern is crystal clear: steal taxpayer dollars, end investigations into the theft, shield loyalists from prosecution, and then use state power to attack critics. That's the definition of a corrupt regime. And while Republicans orchestrate all of this, Crockett points out their hypocrisy on crime. They talk endlessly about safety, yet they're the ones slashing FBI staffing, cutting justice grants, gutting anti-hate crime programs, and eliminating community violence intervention, programs that actually prevent shootings, protect children, and support families.